Welcome, everybody. My name is Cynthia Holt, and I'm the Executive Director for the Council of Atlantic Academic Libraries. Welcome to our webinar today, EmbARKing on digital collections. Today, I just want to do a few housekeeping things first. Since we do have some people coming in on low bandwidth, we ask that you keep your camera off unless you're presenting. And also, just to ensure a great experience for everybody, to have your mics muted unless you're speaking. We will have Q&A throughout the session, so please feel free to put questions in the chat or to unmute yourself to raise your hand and ask a question throughout the session. As well, this session is being recorded. It will be posted, the recording and any slides and links will be posted to the CAAL website, webinars page, and also to the CAAL YouTube channel after the session. So first, I'd like, though, to take this opportunity to acknowledge that CAAL-CBPA members sit on unceded and traditional territories of the Mi'kmaq, Beothuk, Inuit, and Wolastoqiyik, and Pescatamoochatee peoples. Treaties of peace and friendship were first signed in 1725 between the British Crown and the Mi'kmaq and the Wolastoqiyik peoples. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but recognized Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. We acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of the First Peoples of this region, and we express our gratitude as guests on this land. So at this time, I'm going to turn things over to Donald Moses, who is the University Librarian at the University of Prince Edward Island, and also the Board Liaison to the CAAL Digital Preservation and Stewardship Committee, which are the hosts for the session today. Donald.
Hi, folks. We've been working on sort of how to get these folks from the University of Toronto Scarborough into our webinar schedule, and I'm so pleased that they're able to present today around the work they're doing on ARKs. I had the pleasure to meet them in person when they hosted IslandOraCon at their facility in Toronto, and I learned a bit about their work with Islandora and with ARK identifiers, and was totally fascinated and wanted to be able to adopt something like what they were doing. They are a generous group of individuals. They publish their work, so I'll share a link to an article they published about the work they're doing, simplifying ARK ID management for persistent access to digital objects, and also a link to their GitHub, where they provide all kinds of documentation and the code itself if you wanted to stand up an ARK service on your own. At the CRKN meeting, they were talking about persistent identifiers, and I brought up the need for some sort of identifier, ARKs ideally for digital heritage content. There's a huge gap, I think, nationally. University of Toronto Scarborough has provided a really, really fine example of an implementation. And so I will pass it over to my colleagues, Kirsta Stapelfeldt, Bennett Steinburg, and Kyle Huing, who are presenting on behalf of the University of Toronto Scarborough. Go ahead, folks. Thanks.
Thank you, Donald. Let me know if you can't hear me, everybody, and I'll try and keep an eye on the chat, but unmute if you're trying to get our attention. You don't have to hold your questions to the end if you want us to stop and clarify something. We're so grateful to be invited to come and talk today. Always love to come and talk to people from Atlantic Canada, well, from all over. So we're going to talk about our ARK implementation at the U of T Scarborough Library and the software we're using to do it. I'm the Associate Librarian of the Research and Digital Initiatives Department in our library, and with me is Bennett Steinburg, who is our Digital Collections Coordinator. And then just offline here, I should have put his name on the slides, is Kyle Huing, who is the architect of the main software solution that we're using and does most of the maintaining. So if you have hard software questions, he'll be able to help us answer them. I think I can advance these myself, Bennett. I'm just going to take a look. Yep, here we go.
You can. Wonderful.
Yes. So we've all encountered 404 pages on the internet, and I think we can all agree that it's a problem that's getting worse and not better. So while it's annoying when you're trying to find something you discovered on Pinterest, I would say, and I think you'd agree, it's more of a serious professional problem for us in the context of scholarly literature and in our catalogs.
Kirsta,
And I just wanted, yeah.
so I'm looking at the slides and they haven't advanced. So if you have advanced the slides, let me know. I could advance for you if I'm able to.
I think I can. So just
Okay,
let me know,
Bennett.
Kirsta. I'll
Presenter
jump to
has
the next one.
turned-
Does that change
Okay,
for
yeah.
everybody when I do that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you,
So
folks.
you, but probably not you, probably the administrator turned off participant navigation. So that's why I'm not allowed to do it. That makes sense. You don't want everyone advancing the slides on everyone else. Okay, so here we are on the slide where it says a quarter of all the web pages that existed at one point between 2013 and 2023 are no longer accessible. So as I was saying, I think this is a problem that's getting worse. And I just wanted to share something that for me really put how important a problem this is into more stark relief. In 2024, we did a user survey throughout all the University of Toronto libraries. It was the first one we did since 2019. These were people who were invited to participate, called from actual users that we identified in the ALMA ILS. And 7% of those, noted library users never ever went into a physical branch. And that was a pattern that was really carried throughout the user survey where, and I know for me, like I never go into the physical branch of the public library, but I consider myself a heavy public library user. Our assessment librarian said, and I'm paraphrasing a little, but the library websites are our most heavily used branches. So in the same way that we take care and we always have to make sure that things are in the stacks and visible, that's kind of how our online platforms are now. It's really important that we're making that commitment to electronic content as much as we can, since that's increasingly how people are interacting with the library. So this is where we get persistent identifiers. If you could advance, Bennett. It's not a new idea. They've been around for my entire career. They all make varying claims to solve the problem of bit rot by providing a unique and resolvable location to a digital object. Here you can see the popular DOI schema. That's the link on the top that you probably see all the time, as well as an ARK underneath. So that's the identifier, and then it's been made into a clickable link. I think it's important to note, and I apologize if it seems obvious, but our PIDs are not inherently endowed with magical qualities that allow content to persist over time. These are redirection services. So if you've ever used Bitly or another link shortener, the concept is not very different. It just means that that's an address and we maintain the connection between that address and a location. I think it's also important that unlike a service like Bitly, it's usually a public institution or organization that's making that commitment and not a private company. So the portion of these URLs you can see that's red, that kind of represents the organization. Zenato at the top, and then at the bottom, the University of Toronto Scarborough Library is what ARK:61220 means. I point this out because, and if you could advance the slide, Bennett. John Kunze, I think, was the one who said this so well, that all PIDs are aspirational. So they emerge out of our desire for persistence and our commitments to persistence, but it's us, it's the monkeys and not the robots that actually make that commitment and need to manage it over time. So PIDs are a tool in your toolbox for continuing to point users to your content, and your content is going to move around. Server architecture just changes, technologies change. So how will you continue to make sure that someone, if they're looking up that identifier, will find what they anticipate to find? I also want to make this point that when you're thinking about persistent identifiers, there's always this process of minting them, so making them up, binding them to the content, and then the lookup portion or the resolving portion, so that when someone encounters that ID, they're pointed towards digital content. So I think for a lot of systems, we think about this happening on publication. So you publish it in DSpace and it gets a handle, you publish it and it gets a DOI, but that those processes can actually be sort of separated from one another. And that's how we are using the ARK schema in particular. So just in summary, if you could advance again, Bennett. PIDs can't prevent natural disasters. And again, this is John Kunze, who I think just puts this so well. He's also one of the main architects and maintainers of ARK. They can't prevent natural disasters. They can't account for human error. They can't anticipate domain changes, and they can't repair broken links. What they can do is redirect to some digital content If you, the monkey, provides the right URL, they can store metadata about the content they claim to represent if you make that metadata and put it in, and they can continue to resolve as expected if your own server goes away, if somebody else is hosting your materials, and the links are updated accordingly. Can you advance again, Bennett? So given that there's several options for persistent identifiers, why did we choose ARKs? And so we would say they are free, flexible, and feature rich. We can manage the resolution of the ARKs locally, but also there's a global service that does this as well. The names two things service will resolve your ARKs for you. We believe that this is a schema that supports real nuance and transparency in our persistent commitments, because again, persistence and preservation, these are human commitments. You can't preserve everything all the time. There's a lot of layers to preservation, and we really feel like ARK allows us to say explicitly what we're promising to do and what we're not promising to do. It's a very flexible metadata profile and supports what are called these inflection requests. So you can query the ARK, and then if you've set it up properly, you can find out more information about the object. You can also assign it to anything. So you can assign an ARK to a person, place, thing, unique terms in a controlled vocabulary, anything that you want to. We also think that it's a feature that they support early object development. So you can have an ARK and on a piece of digital media, and far before that digital object is published, the ARK can follow it. And we all know that it can take quite a while to prepare content. And so the ARK is a really great way of intellectually managing that content before it is published. And then also I've mentioned John a couple of times because I found that he's very friendly, but if you go to the ARKs Google group, you're going to find an active, lively community. There's a wonderful set of open tools that we were able to use and leverage in creating our own implementation. And did I mention it was free? So those are all the reasons. So those are some of the main reasons we've chosen ARKs. If you could advance again. A lot of people have registered to use ARKs, so 1,400 organizations. Not all of these are actively using ARKs, but many of them are. And I just have a link here. It's a section of that directory of all the names. And if you go, you can see Prince Edward Island there and University of Victoria. And then I put a yellow box. That's us, 61220. If I ever get a tattoo, that can be my tattoo. That's the University of Toronto Scarborough Library. And that is called the name assigning authority number. And what you do is you go and fill out a Google form and you get it in 24 hours. It's as easy as that. So if you can advance again. So getting into what does an ARK actually look like, this is a generic overview taken from the documentation of the components of an ARK following the ARK specification. So here circled in red is sort of the main component of the link. At the very front here, you have the name mapping authority. That's where you're going to host your resolution or your resolving service. That's the URL base for your ARK Resolver service. Then you have your name assigning authority number, which is the institution you come from that you've registered. Again, you're registering those two parts, those two initial parts with ARK.org. Then you have the assign name. So again, you can assign a name to anything, and adding additional fun and complexity, there's this flexible concept of subparts supporting suffix pass-throughs, which are, you can essentially have your ARK be at a top level and then have all these mini components that can reference variants or pages or sections. And all of those, if you were to chop off the URL, will eventually lead you to the top level intellectual object. So you're spoiled for choice in terms of your implementation, and we're using or planning to use several of these features, as well as steadfastly ignoring the can of worms presented by things like versioning. But it would be neglectful not to tell you that you can drive yourself and everyone around you to distraction, modeling the multiple versions of your digital content. And I invite you to fill your boots if you're so inclined. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll show you one of our ARKs, which again, you can see our name mapping authority. That's ark.digital.utsc.utoronto.ca. That's also how the California Digital Library can look up your persistent identifiers and help point your content. This is a direct link to a TIFF page of a book. So we have the label, and then we have our name assigning authority number, and then we have the assigned name. So you'll notice that it says UTSC 88629. So we're using what's called a shoulder in this identifier, and that's something that is optional. So UTSC, we wanted a little bit of human readability, and we sacrificed some of the opacity that really is part of an ideal persistent identifier is totally opaque. Ours is not totally opaque, but we wanted that little bit of branding in there. The rest of the idea is made of a blade, and there are multiple schemas for how you can mint that, and we're using one that supports sequentially increasing numbers with no upper limit on the number of digits. And I can see the chat, so I'm opening it. Oh, no, never mind. Okay. So can you advance again for me? So in order to make the management of the system a little simpler and more transparent for a cataloger, Kyle wrapped some command line software in a lovely user interface and has built us the ARKs service, which has been traditionally maintained as and released as an Ansible playbook, although we haven't updated in a while, but all the software is available to install, and it has been downloaded by others, and we fielded questions about that, and we're very happy to continue to do so in the future. We're going to show you, as we advance through talking to you about how we use ARKs, we're going to show you a little bit about how that software works. Bennett spends a non-trivial portion of his life in this software, and Kyle made it, so they're going to answer all the hard questions. If you could advance again. This is an admittedly kind of hard to read diagram that shows you how we run the ARK service using a public website with the portion pertaining to minting, binding, deleting, and generating reports and ARK management stuff. That's all behind a firewall. So users here on the bottom right can encounter our ARKs in the wild, click on them, and our resolver looks up where that content currently resides and presents the user with the object. Or if the user is seeking information using one of the supported ARK inflections, there's some additional information about the object. They'll go directly to the ARK service to get that information. So if you could advance again. With that introductory material about ARKs out of the way, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our digital collections, which again are maintained by Kyle, Bennett. We have another developer named Kireen Lechmacanthan and a systems administrator named Irfan Rahman. In addition, there's a motley crew of librarians, researchers, community members, undergraduates, and graduate students. Our collections are developed inside the classroom, outside the classroom. They really come from all over. And all those people will help us maintain those collections. This is a homepage where you can access most, if not all, of our content. We gave it a permalink, which you can see on the bottom. And then I've also added the N2T link below. So again, if you maintain the service, names to things will resolve your ARKs for you, as well as long as you maintain your base URL information with them via some systems magic. I think it's magic. This is free. We're not paying any subscriber service to do this. We retain control over our data. It's been as simple as sending an email to get it updated. If you could advance once more, Bennett. Before I hand you to Bennett, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about our collections. We have currently about 500,000 digital objects, but this is rapidly growing. We're about to launch a textual collection that will double the size of our current collection and are waiting for a couple of very large media projects to finish. So we're positioned for exponential growth in this system. We have 76 collections currently made up of images, including surrogates of textual materials, things like PDFs, as well as video, audio, and web archives. I've linked to our metadata dictionary, which is an open document that we maintain that describes all of our metadata decisions and tracks them for us. The second page, the philosophies for collections development, is just a link to our website where we've talked a little bit about our philosophy for developing collections, where we focus heavily on collaborative description and non-extractive sort of post-custodial models for ownership. That means a lot of the things that we have, if there is a physical counterpart, we don't necessarily hold that physical counterpart. That often will stay with a community group or another memory institution. And we also have, I've linked here to the description of the ARK service. This is the homepage that you would encounter at that public resolving site, and tells you a little bit more about ARKs. And so if you're interested in this and want to read more, that's what you can do. So that's my talking head out of the way. I'm going to pass it to Bennett, who's going to walk you through the use of ARKs in our collection as we develop our collections. Thanks.
Sure.
Over to you, Bennett.
Thank you, Kirsta. Likewise, folks, let me know if you struggle to hear me or need clarification on anything that I go over in the next little section. So the U of T Scarborough digital collections, we've kind of, for the purposes of thinking about how ARKs fit into the collections, we've kind of divided our collections development, or the life cycle of an object in our collections, into 5 steps. These are kind of broad stages that encompass both how we develop the collections and how we maintain them using ARKs at each step of the process. Having an ARK kind of follow an object from even before it is posted online and the ARK is bound to it, all the way to a possible end stage for the object is it can add some really nice continuity to the process. And so we'll kind of go through what each of these stages look like and how ARKs fit in at each stage. Since ARKs are something that can be minted freely and without a requirement for publicly associating them with objects, minting being generating a new ARK with a new globally unique ARK, we mint ARKs at accession of materials. So we take advantage of the fact that we can freely mint and associate them to support early object creation and allow for an easy and smooth transition from the accession process into the rest of collection development. ARKs work whether or not we are doing large-scale file transfers or smaller and more curated uploads into digital collections. So let's take a look at two examples and how ARKs could fit into those case studies. The first is the Ken Jones collection. The Ken Jones collection is a large collection of digitized and born digital photographs taken by campus photographer Ken Jones. It records the development of U of T Scarborough, student life, academic events, and more. This collection lives as part of a larger campus history collection called the Memory Project, and materials currently in our digital repository as part of this collection sum up to nearly 22,000 objects. This collection was developed in collaboration with the U of T Scarborough Archive, which holds both the physical and original digital files of which we have copies. The accession of this collection was spurred by Ken Jones' retirement, at which point his records were transferred to the archives and to us, to the library. The materials on this site reflect less than half of the original 47,786 photographs that we received. Some of these didn't make their way up into the digital collection because they were duplicates, and some of them because they were placed under embargo, because at the time of accession, they were taken too recently, and we wanted to add some lead time before we thought about putting them up for public view on the digital collection. In cases where we receive extreme volumes of media all at once like this, we're able to mint ARKs for all of them. So in cases like this, we could mint 47,786 ARKs and associate them with all of the pieces of media that we've received for use of internal organization, cataloging, and decision-making. Again, because at minting, there is no public or binding commitment to the relationship between an ARK and a piece of media, we're able to freely associate and disassociate ARKs from files as we need to during this process. In cases like this, where a number of objects don't make their way into the digital repository with the initial collection creation, we have a bunch of options. One option is maintaining the relationship internally only, not publicly claiming that relationship between an ARK and an object. This could be used for objects that are under embargo. And then we could bind that ARK to the object once the embargo is lifted and the object is ready to be uploaded to the digital collection. Or we can completely disassociate all of the ARKs that we had originally minted for materials that didn't make it to the digital collection. We could disassociate the ARKs from those objects and add them to a list of minted but not bound ARKs that can be repurposed in the future to track the development of other collections. So there's a number of paths forward you can take with this. Kind of on the flip side of things in terms of size, ARKs can also be quite useful when building a collection on a much smaller scale and over a much longer period of time. Another collection that we've used ARKs to assist our work with is the Scarborough Oral History Project, developed in partnership with Professor Christine Berkowitz, that serves as an oral history of Scarborough campus over the course of 190 audio recordings and discussions between researchers and U of T Scarborough alumni, faculty, students, and staff. The collection is hosted on a dedicated site called Scarborough Storytelling and was gradually developed up to its current size over the course of nearly 10 years. Since the production of these audio files is practically, intellectually, and a technically involved process, involving some amount of editing, transcription, the organization of the interviews, etc., We accessioned these recordings and their transcripts in an initial larger batch, and then continued to add between 1 and 5 recordings, maybe twice a year or quarterly, depending on the given year, over the intervening years from the initial ingest. Because this collection is being created and provided to us by researchers, there's a sense of pre-curation to it. We're not having to kind of mess around in a big pile of media and select what goes up on the site and what doesn't. So because of that, we only minted as many ARKs as we knew that we would need for these objects once they were available to the public. This meant minting 1 to 2 ARKs at a time, sometimes a little bit more, and doing so on a much closer timeline to eventual ingest. So it works at scale, and it works and is helpful at a smaller scale as well. Following from these 2 examples, next I'm going to show a very short video of what minting ARKs actually looks like using the ARK service platform. I'll click this video and it'll probably take a second. Okay, here we go. So minting is as easy as scrolling down in the ARK service user interface and under the text, how many ARKs would you like to mint, typing in the number of ARKs you'd like to mint. In this case, we'll do 10. To the right of this text box is a list of all minted ARKs, sorted sequentially from oldest to newest and according to our minting pattern. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. It
Yeah,
looks like when I'm seeing the screen, it says inserted URL is not from a currently supported video provider.
Oh dear. That's too bad.
Oh no, it looks so good for me.
Oh no. Okay.
Is anyone else just in chat?
Okay.
Are folks seeing an actual slide?
I'm seeing the same
or
message
they are-
as
The
you,
same
Donald.
thing?
Okay.
Okay. Well, drat.
Do you have them downloaded, Bennett? I guess we got a lower bandwidth issue. Or
mhm.
do you feel
You
about how do you
could-
feel about sharing? Oh, go ahead,
Yeah.
Donald.
No, I was just going to suggest you could share your
Yeah,
video
sure.
screen instead of the
let's go
slides
for it.
temporarily.
Yep. Let's go for it.
Sorry about that.
Oh gosh, thank you for flagging it.
Yeah, if you're sharing a video, also make sure before when you do the share to click on, there's a little checkbox at the top of the share thing that says pass through the audio.
Okay.
Well, there's no audio, so we've got that. He just timed that perfectly, and I can tell you, it's timed perfectly.
It says
so
include
we'll
sound.
All right. Here we go. Are folks able to see?
Yep.
Okay,
Beautiful.
wonderful. So now you can actually see. There's a sense of scrolling down, a simple text box where you can input the number of ARKs you'd like to mint. You can click mint, and you'll see the table on the right-hand side. It has a list of ARKs, so they're organized from the first ARKs we minted in October of 2020, up to 91,918 ARKs, soon to be 928 ARKs. This is a rolling list of all minted ARKs that we've minted using ARK service. And it's both searchable and sortable. So if we invert the sort from oldest to newest down to oldest, you can see when this was recorded yesterday, a series of 10 new ARKs that are ready for you to start working with. So I'll stop sharing my screen there. And
I stole it. I want to try something.
okay, you're going to try something,
Okay.
please.
Do you want to say something in cataloging? Or we?
Yeah, absolutely. One moment. We're switching it up.
We're trying to switch it up.
All right. So the process of cataloging is where we're creating metadata to associate with accessioned objects.
Wait. Nope. Try one more time. Sorry, it's not letting me advance them as I'd expect. Let's go here. Because I think if we can share our screen but not share it within the Teams app, then I think, do you know what I mean? Like I was thinking that it would show the video. Okay. Yeah, because did you say present in Teams?
I did say present in Teams.
I think if we just say present.
Yeah, sure.
What slide number are you at?
We are on slide 20.
Guess this is what we should have done instead of talking about the weather with our 15 minutes. Here we go.
Yeah, maybe. We live and learn.
Okay.
So, um, in our digital collections development, this cataloging process is going to look different depending on the specifics of the collection. Sometimes we're working from square one, generating original metadata all ourselves to describe the materials that we've received. Other times we're consulting with project partners. Oh, and you stopped sharing your screen, Kirsta.
Oh, not according to me.
Yeah, we're not seeing a screen anymore. It was being shared by Kirsta, but it's gone now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's back.
Okay.
Tell me if it disappears again. That was weird.
Yeah. Other times we consult with project partners, providing them with guidance and assistance in creating descriptive metadata about the materials that they are bringing to the table, and then reviewing that metadata and bringing it into line with our general metadata profile. ARKs fit into this stage by internally disambiguating objects from one another as we catalog them. If we have multiple objects and records that describe the same general thing, their association with an ARK, even if it's just internal, helps us in having conversations about their content in a very specific and precise way, as well as ensuring that no file gets associated with the wrong metadata record. Next slide. Most of our cataloging work is done in Google Sheets, as you can kind of faintly see in this screenshot. We like this as a tool because it can be worked on collaboratively, both internal at University of Toronto Scarborough Library, but also with project partners. It's easier to get them into the Google Sheets ecosystem often than it is to get them into the Microsoft Office suite ecosystem that we use at U of T. We store ARKs and anticipated ARK permalinks as metadata fields in the eventual catalog record, and use those to sort, organize, and categorize parts of the metadata within the spreadsheets. You can even see in this example that the ARKs in column C sit alongside two other identifiers for the object. So our use of ARKs is not exclusive just to ARKs. We use them in tandem with other, sometimes legacy or legacy identifiers or things that are serve slightly different functions. So in this case, it's PIDs that were generated by kind of generated and then deprecated before we adopted ARKs. And node IDs, which indicate a record's place on an island or a website or in a collection, but which are not globally unique. They're only unique within that specific website. Next slide. Concurrently with the cataloging, U of T Scarborough Library also often creates reformatted copies and derivatives of media being prepared as it's being prepared to be added to our collections. As part of that process, we assess the needs of the collection once it will be made publicly available. So this includes technical requirements involved in serving a particular kind of media or file to the public while maintaining a good user experience, as well as what other files we may need to associate with an object in our digital collection to support accessibility. So things like transcripts, screen-readable PDFs, things like that. As part of this process, we not only use tools and programs to create copies of those files and derivatives, but we also use ARKs as names of these derivative files, allowing for easy maintenance of the relationship between those derivatives, their original file, and the eventual object in the digital collection. Next slide. So on this slide is an example of how we might use an ARK as a file name for most of the media being prepared to be ingested into our digital collection. It's as simple as following a naming scheme that we just kind of we thought about a little bit, but just kind of came up that made sense to us, which is namely stripping away the NAN, so that name assigning authority number 61220 for us, and replacing all slashes that might appear in the ARK with dashes, just to maintain proper file naming structure. In cases like the one above, you'll see there are two files, two JPEG files. So in this kind of invented case, one of those is meant to serve as the thumbnail image, and one of those is to serve as a lighter weight access copy for a high quality TIFF scan that'll be easier to serve to users of the digital collection. In cases like these, where if we were just naming it after the ARK, those would be two identically named files. Whichever file we would produce second and would thus cause there to be a non-unique file name. We add a camel case, so a phrase removing all spaces, version of the purpose of the derivative. So in our case, we draw this from the PCDM media use vocabulary, and we append that to the end of the file name. This naming scheme is useful both for internal management of files before ingest into our digital collection, but it's also quite useful potentially for long-term preservation, as this way the files are directly associated with the ARK, they have it in their name, and it would become much easier to reconnect all the files together in a worst-case scenario where somehow they became separated. Next slide. So from serving as a kind of an internal tool of organization and disambiguation between files and records, the ingest and maintenance part of our collection, so the upload of materials to our digital collections and maintaining them over time once they are public, involves one, the public commitment that we make that an ARK becomes associated with an object. So this is us telling the world that that we are now committing, we're publicly committing to this ARK representing this object. So binding those two together, as well as ARKs starting to host an abridged version of an object's metadata record. During this stage, we use tools like the Python program Island or Workbench, as well as our ARK service platform to make large batch uploads, bindings, and updates to metadata and media in association with our collections. Binding of an ARK to an object, so setting up that redirect, so the ARK begins actually pointing to the publicly accessible object, is done immediately after digital collection objects are ingested to our website, but before they are officially launched. This gives us an opportunity to rebind ARKs if we make a mistake, fix issues in metadata, and other last-minute tweaks before we actually do make that public commitment, that much more binding public commitment to the relationship between an ARK and its object. Next sheet. So as with the metadata that goes into our digital collections in Islandora, the binding of an ARK to its redirect URL, as well as any metadata about the object that is being held by the ARK, is organized through Google Sheets. We like to kind of stay in that ecosystem as much as possible. On this slide, we both have a screenshot of the first half of an ARK, a bulk ARK binding sheet, which I'll show you in a little bit more detail in a moment, as well as a link to a sample binding sheet in Google Sheets you can follow once you get access to the slides. Next. So binding is a slightly more involved process on ARK service than minting is, and there are a few options that a given user has when using our ARK service platform to bind an ARK to metadata and to an object. Next slide, and that's a video. So you have multiple objects when you're binding. You can scroll down to this bound ARK section and you'll see two in this dropdown. Binding an ARK, which binds single ARK's single metadata field to a particular value. This isn't generally used when we're doing bulk bindings during ingest, and instead we use the bulk binding option. This provides a list of metadata fields from a kind of a deprecated scheme, as well as a download link for a CSV template that is legible to ARK service and can be filled in and used for this bulk binding. Any bulk binding requires the input of the admin password, as well as the upload of either a CSV or TSV file. Here, you can see this ARK UTSC 25675. And if I go to the inflection, which I'll talk about in a moment, that should display all of the metadata associated with that ARK. You'll see it's empty. And when I try to navigate to the object itself through the ARK, I'm redirected to a 404 page. This is the natural state for an ARK that's unbound. Nobody should be really navigating to it anyway. But using this sheet, we can associate the ARK with a number of fields that are both descriptive about the object that the ARK represents, as well as descriptive of our persistence commitment to the ARK and its object. In terms of actually binding, it's just as simple as uploading either the TSV or CSV. In this case, we'll do the TSV and then starting the binding process. And
this
it's
isn't
that
sped
quick.
up, right?
No, that was
real
not sped
time.
up at all.
Yeah.
And now navigating back to this place that's supposed to be displaying all the metadata associated with the ARK, if we refresh it, you can see now it's populated with a number of plain text fields with the information from the CSV associated with the ARK.
All right, let's see what happens now. I think I have to exit just a sec.
Sure.
Just looking at the time here too, Bennett, to make sure you know, because I think we're supposed to be done soon.
Yeah, for sure.
What slide are we on? What number?
We are on slide 28.
Almost there.
Hmm.
So it didn't work as nicely as it did the other day, but that's okay. There, can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
So just to take a bit of a closer look at how the metadata record associated with the ARK is stored and presented by ARK service, you can see it's plain text, very simple, and quite limited in the information it actually stores. This is a mix between descriptive metadata, practical information like where the ARK permalink points to, and a simplified, fielded expression of our commitment to the persistence of the ARK and its metadata. Next slide. I won't get too into the weeds here. But the ARK specification recommends but does not require the use of Dublin kernels. So this is an extra simplified version of Dublin core, which seeks to answer questions framed as who, what, when, where, and how about an object, adding on extra little descriptors onto those questions in order to clarify what exactly you're asking who, what, when, where, and how about. And this metadata is presented as something called an electronic resource citation, an ERC, which is basically that kind of plain text format that you saw against a white background. And for us, our ARK metadata is presented in two sections. So there's the ERC, the regular electronic resource citation, which is the descriptive metadata, and support-ERC, which represents persistence metadata, or our commitment to supporting the ARK. This metadata is visible through something called inflections associated with the ARK permalink. So there are three that are supported through ARK service. The first one, !info, displays both kinds of metadata, and this is the inflection that is currently supported in the ARK specification. But there are also two kind of iterations on that, a single or double question mark, which will show you either only the descriptive metadata or both kinds of metadata. Go next slide. It takes a little work to not very much though to crosswalk from our normal object descriptive metadata, which is an extension of mods, into Dublin kernel. Here I've listed what that looks like, but I won't run down it in too much detail. But we could probably just skip to the next slide. The second piece of this is the persistence metadata. So this is generated specifically for ARKs and represents our persistence commitment on an object level. So right now, all of our persistence metadata is the same for all of our objects, but in an eventuality where we have different commitments to different objects, we would be able to represent those in this section of the metadata bound to the ARK. This can also deviate from any broad narrative persistence statements that we make about our commitment to ARKs and the objects in our collection. These follow the what, where, and when questions with support added at the front, which answer questions about what our commitment is, who's making the commitment, where you can find a more detailed commitment, and the effective date of our current persistence statement. Next slide. I'm just going to call out here another kind of very flexible affordance offered through the ARK specification and supported by ARK service, which is called suffix pass-through. This is what Kirsta mentioned earlier regarding the ability to append with slashes kind of extra length to the ARK. This can be attached to a different object than the one that the base ARK is attached to, but generally speaking, it's meaningful in that it tells somebody interacting with that ARK that it refers to an object that is a part of the core ARK at its base. So for example, UTSC 35559 has a part P1. So we can mint one ARK and then bind that ARK to the kind of core object, like a book with multiple scanned pages. For each of those pages, we can mint a subpart to the ARK, not mint, but we can bind a subpart to the ARK slash P1, P2, P3, etc. And then we can also go so far as to bind ARKs to the specific files associated with each of those parts or with the base object. These parts can be opaque or meaningful. We've chosen to make them meaningful, as we have with adding that UTSC branded shoulder at the start. But this isn't limited to cases like books, where books have pages, and that's kind of a very clear hierarchical relationship. You can also use this to reflect more kind of complex custodial environments, reflect original order, and things like that. In particular, we're currently working on a collection of CAAL slave registries that is a collection of digital surrogates that we have on license from the National Archive in the UK that are enriched with transcriptions produced by a scholar. We are very excited about working with this scholar because he has connections with working groups of the formerly enslaved and their descendants, and has an interest in creating legible and faithful transcriptions with the interest of empowering the Tamil public in Sri Lanka to both illuminate the effects of the British slave trade there, as well as assist formerly enslaved in learning more about their ancestry. In this case, it's important for us to reflect and respect the original intellectual organization of the collection from the National Archive, even when it conflicts with the transcription work, as well as preserving provenance and context from it. In this case, we have a single core ARK that we've minted at the collection level and are using the suffix pass-through to represent the original organization in the National Archive for each of the registers included in this collection. So that is, at the book level, we are going to be preserving the collection ARK and using the original identifiers assigned by the National Archive to denote one register, and then adding another suffix pass-through for each of the pages. Next slide. Once a collection has been created, so begins the process of maintaining its metadata, both in the digital collection itself and the ARK metadata record. The following is a video of what this process looks like using the ARK service. So looking at the last video, perhaps I realized that the metadata record that I produced has the wrong date associated with it. It actually should be dated on March 12th instead of March 11th. To fix this, I could unbind the ARK. So that is remove values from its metadata fields. I could do this for all the fields, or from this dropdown, I could choose a particular, like one particular field. However, a much easier way to do that in this case is to go back to that binding a single field to a single ARK, inputting manually the ARK ID, inputting manually the field name, and then in this case, I'm copying and pasting the date structure, and I'm going to adjust the day number from 11 to 12. In this case, you can see the metadata has been updated, it's been overwritten, and it's kind of good going forward. This update can also can also be made using that same bulk binding process that we had, as well as creating entirely new fields. So for example, if we wanted to add a field called collection, we could do that and add in a value, and it will be appended to the existing metadata record instead of overwriting it. Kirsta, we can probably cut the video here in the interest of time. Those are the two core.
Okay. Oop. Almost there.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Okay. So the last step in this is deaccessioning. So U of T Scarborough Library, we have a pretty official takedown policy that we are happy to follow through on. Basically, this means that on occasion we're deaccessioning records that have been public and that have an ARK assigned to them. We're able to use that ARK. We were able to use ARK service to tombstone deaccessioned records and assert that while the object on the website no longer exists, it's been removed. It once did, and the ARK redirect is not just broken because we forgot to change the redirect link. For any materials in our collections, the consent of its subjects must be ongoing and enthusiastic. There are lots of reasons why we might deaccession a record. That is one of them. If a participant withdraws their consent to be depicted, we are generally pretty happy to take materials down unless there's other mitigating circumstances. This may also relate to matters of intellectual ownership or copyright, or in one case, the transition of an interview subject who was looking to remove media referencing their dead name from the internet in cases where they could. The way that our ARKs are able to support this is, one, we remove the object from the website, so the public cannot access it anymore. And instead of redirecting an ARK to a page on the website that gives an error message that material doesn't exist anymore, we're actually able to direct the ARK to its own metadata record. So we can tell the ARK, hey, actually direct to your own URL appended with !info, which and as well as include a couple extra metadata fields, meta when and meta where, you can see at the top of this screenshot, noting both the takedown date, so the effective date at which the content is no longer accessible, as well as a very simple takedown statement. The goal here is not to preserve discoverability online, but rather to assist people who already have the ARK permalink saved in reasserting to them that there's no mistake here. The ARK that they have is correct. It's just that the object is no longer available. Because in this way, our ARK service database is serving as a little bit of preservation data about these materials, we have to take special care in backing up, maintaining records on ARK service so that we can preserve these tombstone metadata records. And shall we, Kirsta, maybe move past reporting just so we can wrap things up?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I'll just say quickly, like, we do intend to continue to invest in the ARKs ecosystem. And we have some things planned, including ARKs for our IIIF manifests. And we also have to have some problems, like not scaling with minting and binding, but we have some issues scaling with reporting. So we can run reports. So you can always find out how many unbound ARKs do you have, how many bound ARKs. There's also how many times has the ARK been clicked, so you can see how effective the redirection service is over time. And I also want to shout out UNT, who's been a huge source of inspiration on the ARKs implementation, as well as other things. Tons and tons of great ideas at the UNT Digital Library, just a bunch of geniuses. Shout out to Kyle, who builds and maintains this. He's not alone. Students help him, our other developer helps as well. But he is the main architect of all of this, references for the presentation. And I think we got a couple of minutes for questions if you have them. So nice of you to have us here. And I know it's a lot. It's pretty dense.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
I just pasted the link into the article that you wrote for Code for Lib, so that will also give people some context. I originally had a question I was going to pose about how do you get to the metadata of the ARK, thinking that other people would be interested in that. So it's good that you shared the info option there. Any questions that people online may have? Anyone using ARKs or considering ARKs?
I'll say that if you're using Islandora, there are other ways to get persistent identifiers in your system. We just didn't really want there to be a one-to-one between a repository item, node ID, and an ARK. So for us, it's a feature that we can kind of control how we mint, bind, and where we resolve ARKs. But I know a lot of our repository systems don't work that way. But I think that this has been a really great way for us in Islandora to support this. And also we use we can embed the ARK into the URL in Islandora pretty easily as well, so that when people go to the actual objects, the ARK is, we always share the ARK on the page. The ARK is our share link, but if you're using just the thing from the top of the browser, you can also set that up so that the object looks like it's at an ARK.
How much is manual and how much is automated? If you know what I mean.
Well, the metadata is always some combination of, human intellectual endeavor that we derive, and then we do a bunch of stuff in Excel. So, I mean, I think we automate what we can, but Bennett certainly spends a lot of time curating things. Like we have a human eye that looks at everything, but we do all we can to have tooling around things that would otherwise be really mechanical. So we try and stop people from having to do a process that's like knitting, where you have to hand look at everything, just so we have some checks in place to make sure that sort of the simple things that a robot can do, but to empower the monkey to do what the monkey's supposed to be able to do. How many people might it take to run things at UTSC scale? So right now, I'd say your dream team is, I actually can't picture doing it without Bennett, but if you had catalogers in other places, then maybe you could get them to do it. But I'd say we've got one systems administrator who works with our local IT and kind of speaks that language and gets us in. We've got 2 developers, because I think it's not a good idea to just have one developer by themselves. I think it's better if you have 2 folks. Although I think theoretically, depending on how much custom stuff you wanted to do, it's important to us to develop things in a general way and release them. I think you probably could do it with 1 software developer, and then Bennett's full time on this. So Bennett supervises students, derives all the metadata from available sources, does any unique cataloging that's required, and does our ingest and maintenance. So I don't know if that helps. I saw that question about how many people it might take to run things at UTSC scale. I'm not really involved in the day-to-day of this as much anymore. I drum up business. So when the faculty come in and they are setting up projects, or the community members are coming in, I'm on doing MOUs, policies, timelines, promises, and coordinating with my boss about what we can and can't do and what our priorities are.
But your team
Thanks,
is also working on all the other things outside of the ARK service. So
yeah.
Just to give the context there.
We do teaching, that's why I don't say there's really a librarian dedicated to it, because all of us that are librarians are doing something else on the side. And also we maintain the UTSC library website, not the core infrastructure, but all of the Drupal deployment, the specific deployment, including the theme. We get the rest. We get the bulk of the theme from our local web development team, but we do make a fair bit of changes to make it work with Islandora. So we have to do that too, but we don't have to do the catalog, and we don't do, with these new nationalized infrastructures, we're not doing the IR or the, Dataverse or anything like that. But we also have a big preservation chain we run alongside this that we didn't really talk about. So everything we have, we back up in the OLRC, we generate archival information packages, do fixity checking and reporting in that way as well. So it's a busy crew, but I think that it's, it's taken a while to build up the staffing, but with the hiring of Bennett as a permanent person, I think that what we've got now, we have a system that will really scale.
Awesome. And it shows the institutional commitment, which I think is really the key. You gotta have this support.
Well, that's, I think when our library was reorganized into those two halves, you know, and we really focused on research services, and a lot of our research services work cast in a slightly different light is the digital collections work. Thanks so much, guys.
Okay.
It's nice to see all your bubbles.
Thank you, everyone.